There was a carnival in town, and Dan Klein was going alone. His best friend Mike Nelson had a date with Candy Delaney. Candy was going to invite her sister Shannon to go out with Dan, but at the last minute, Shannon declined and found a friend for the evening. Dan was disappointed by this. He was in love with Shannon and had known her for most of his life. She was very sweet and had an amazing personality. She was that girl, or the alpha girl. She was a walking stereotype. A blonde, curvy-legged cheerleader who didn't act like she was popular or beautiful like she really was. Dan, Mike, and Candy had just graduated from high school and were in the final stages of preparing for college. Candy was going to Northern Illinois and DeKalb, and Dan and Mike were going to the University of Illinois at Chicago. They lived in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, and UIC was a short walk away. NIU was a little farther away, and Candy lived on campus. Shannon was already in college at NIU. She was 2 years older than Candy. At the carnival, Dan looked at the opportunity to get away from Mike and Candy. He didn't want to be a fifth wheel and felt awkward. He couldn't foresee that he would soon get his chance. They were in line for tickets to the ride when Dan saw Shannon running, chased by Steve Rouse. Dan yelled, "Come on!" to Mike, and he ran after them. They ended up behind a tent and out of sight. When he caught up with them, Shannon was lying on the ground holding her ankle and crying. Steve, hunched over, was yelling at her when Dan grabbed him and pulled him back, causing his attacker to fall. Steve got up and threw Dan a punch that landed squarely on his nose. With his nose bleeding, Dan looked around and saw that he was alone. Mike didn't pursue him. Steve and Dan were about the same height, but Steve was more muscular and a few years older. Dan threw a punch that went past his opponent's face and lost his balance. Steve pushed the falling Dan to the muddy ground and then punched him. At that moment, fortunately for Dan, a police officer on a golf cart drove by, forcing Steve to run aside. Shannon crawled over to him and checked to see how badly he was hurt. "Did I win?" asked Dan with a smile, sitting up in the dirt. "No, I'd call it a draw," replied Shannon. "How's your ankle?" "I think it's broken. I can't put any weight on it." Dan stood up and looked around. He saw that they were near a medical tent and said, "Come on, I'll help you to the tent." "Okay." He pulled her up to him, and when she tried to lean on him, she almost fell. He said, "We'll do this the easy way," and lifted her up. He walked the 100 or so yards to the medical tent, carrying her easily in his arms. There was a policeman there, dealing with a drunk, and an EMT waiting for something to do. "What happened to you?" the officer asked. Dan recognized him. It was his parents' friend, Frank Brady. The medic helped her lie down on the table and examined her ankle, while Dan and the policeman talked. "Mr. Brady, she was attacked by her companion and hurt her ankle running away from him. I tried to be Mr. White Knight and help her, but I was lucky he got away." "How did it all start?" the officer asked Shannon. "He got mad that I didn't—" She paused, not wanting to say the words. "It's okay. I need to know," he told her. "I said I wouldn't do anything on the Ferris wheel. He was drunk, and he's a mean drunk. When we got off the ride, he pulled me off and said I would do it voluntarily. There was no way I was going to agree, so I hit him and ran away. I fell behind the tents, and then Dan came out of nowhere as Steve yelled at me. That's what I thought too. I pulled him back and he pounced on me." Dan added, "Who is this guy?" "Steve Rouse," she said. "Okay. Since you were hurt, I have to file a report. You'll both need to testify. How bad is it, Johnny?" "I don't think it's broken, but it still needs to be x-rayed. It's pretty swollen, so we need to ice it first." "Okay, check on Lancelot and make sure his nose isn't broken." Shannon was taken to the hospital by ambulance while Dan was checked out. He texted Candy to come to the med tent to tell her what had happened so she could call her parents. He was on his way out of the tent when Mike and Candy approached him from the direction of the parking lot. "What happened?" asked Candy. "Your sister tried to run away from her date and I intervened. Long story short, she's on her way to the hospital right now with an injured ankle, and her jerk of a date got away." "Jesus," Mike said. Yeah, asshole. I told you to come when I ran after her. What the hell happened? I didn't hear you, I'm sorry. Yeah, but I'm just as bad. I was lucky. He was going to stomp me to death. I need to go to the hospital. My folks will meet me there. Can you drive me? Asked Candy, ending the conversation. Yeah, sure, replied Mike, and took her hand as they walked to his car. I'll see you guys later, Dan said as he left. A couple weeks later, Dan and Mike were sitting by Dan's pool, and Dan asked, How's Candy doing? Nothing. We went out a few times, but it didn't work out as a couple. I see. Well, she's leaving for school soon anyway. Yeah, her dad rented an apartment there for her and Shannon. They've probably already left by now. Ah, Dan said regretfully. He never got a chance to find out how Shannon was doing. Since Steve hadn't hit her, he got off with a slap on the wrist for fighting with Dan. Steve was going to Alabama for school and came back early. Dan was glad. He didn't want a rematch. The school year passed without incident, and over Christmas break, Dan ran into Candy at the mall. Hey, Candy, how's it going? Good. Just shopping for last-minute gifts. How about you? Same. How's school? Challenging, but good. Shannon is a big help. We're both in accounting, so she can help me with my classes, since she's already taken them. That's good. How is she feeling? How's the ankle? Fine, it's all healed. Is she in town? He asked hopefully. No, she got back together with a guy she dated in high school and went home with him for the vacations. Oh, Dan said sadly, and Candy noticed it. Dan, so you want to have lunch? Yeah, sure. How about Maggiano's? Sounds good. I'll drive. Next chapter. You like my sister, don't you? Said Candy as they waited for a table. I guess so, he replied, embarrassed. She's older than us. You don't stand a chance with her, you know that. I never considered that possibility. Anyway, I'm here with you, not her. She smiled when he said that. Dan continued. When are you coming back? The 7th. Classes won't start for a while, but I'd like to get settled in already. Sure, makes sense. You know it's only a little over an hour's drive from here. Dan was interested in that unsolicited comment of hers. Had she really taken an interest in him and said it wasn't that far to go out during the school year? Yeah, do you even come home on weekends? I would come if I had a reason, she replied with a smile as the buzzer alerted them that their table was ready. They had a wonderful time over their meal, chatting easily and without awkwardness. Dan had a crush on her, and he could tell she was very flirtatious with him. Dan insisted on paying for lunch, and as he was paying, he asked her, Would you like to go to the movies tomorrow night? She thought for a bit and replied, I have a date with Mike, sorry. It's more to have something to do. We didn't really bond when we went out over the summer. I'll cancel and we can go. No, don't do that. We can do it another time, he said. He didn't want to get into a love triangle with his friend and Candy. He decided he needed to talk to Mike because there had to be some interest if he was going to go out with her again. When she dropped him off at his car, he said goodbye and kissed her on the cheek. She said, Please call me, Dan. I'd like to see you again. Sure, I'll see you. Next chapter. Dude, are you seeing Candy again? Asked Dan to his friend. Yeah, she's great. Yeah, but you said you two weren't getting back together. We won't have to get back together if I can get between her legs. I almost did that last time, but my parents came home and interrupted us. She went to school after that. How did you even find that out? I ran into her at the mall. We had lunch and I asked her out for tomorrow. She told me she was dating you. I didn't know you were interested. It's just one date. After it, you can claim her. I'm not falling in love or anything. Whatever. Just pumping it out and throwing it away, right? Hey man, if she's ready and willing, so can I. Next chapter. Dan went to the movies with his little sister Angie and a few of her friends. While waiting for the show to start, he saw Mike and Candy sitting 2 rows in front of them. Angie asked, What's the matter, bro? Do you like this girl? What? You look sad and stare at Mike's companion. Kind of like her. I asked her out tonight, but she already had a date with him. She said she wasn't crazy about him and wanted to break things off, but I told her not to. That was stupid, she said, as Mike and Candy started kissing. She seemed a little interested, Angie said. Yeah, I guess so. The movie was good, but Mike and Candy didn't know it. They kissed throughout the whole session. When the movie was over and they got up to leave, Candy noticed Dan looking at her. She frowned and had the decency to look embarrassed, but didn't say anything. Mike noticed him, and behind Candy's back showed him a thumbs up. Angie said, "Well, at least you have an advantage over him tonight." What's that supposed to mean? You have 3 hot girls with you, and he only has her. The other girls giggled at that. Dan laughed and said, "As great as that sounds, sis, a foursome with 16-year-olds is not my thing." One of her friends replied, "Too bad." They all laughed as they left. Dan didn't call Candy for the rest of their break. He didn't want to get between her and Mike, especially after Mike told him that he and her were fine, and he was going to keep seeing her for the rest of the vacation. The day Candy was about to go back to school, she called him. "Dan, why didn't you call me?" "Well, first of all, you lied to me about the extent of your interest in Mike." "No." "The way you played hockey with him in the movie suggests that you did." "Of course, what you did in the car, what you did when you got back to his house says you did it." "That bastard told you all this?" "Yes. He knew I was interested in asking you out. I think he told me that as a warning to either stay out of it or stay away from people who put themselves out there when they're not interested in a guy. I'm glad he did, especially since you saw him the whole break. That's a lot for someone you haven't bonded with." "Dan, it's—" She tried to speak, but Dan interrupted her. "No, you don't have to explain. We weren't dating. You were free to date whoever you wanted." "Dan, I really like you. Why don't we go out sometime? It's not at all what you think." "No, it's not what I think. I like you too, but you either lied to me about your feelings for Mike or you're too fast for me, if you know what I mean." "Are you saying I'm a slut?" "Not at all. I just don't need a nick on the pole. I don't do casual hookups." She snorted, holding back tears. "Look, I've got to go. Have a safe trip to school. Tell Shannon I said hi." She ended the conversation without saying anything. Dan regretted the conversation. He knew he shouldn't have said what he said, but her acrimony had hit a nerve. The next day, he received a text from a number that wasn't saved in his contacts. "My sister is an idiot, Lancelot." He realized it could only be Shannon and replied, "No, she's just not the right sister." He regretted sending that message as soon as he hit the send button. He didn't need Shannon to know he liked her as long as she was dating someone. Her reply was a simple frown emoji. Next chapter. Dan and Mike were having lunch at the mall during spring break when Shannon and Candy approached them. Mike didn't have time to react before Candy hit him with such force that she seemed to break his arm. "You lying bastard. Did you tell him we were having fun? You knew he liked me, you piece of shit. You even lied to him about seeing me at recess. I had one date with you, asshole." Dan was shocked. He saw Shannon behind her nod as if her words were true. He looked at Mike, who hadn't uttered a word. "Mike?" said Dan. "Look, I wanted her to have a fair chance. I knew you wouldn't have messed with her if you thought she was an easy target. I told you that so I'd have a chance before you got together with her." "Dude, you're my best friend. Why would you do this to me?" "Screw it. Yeah, I'm your friend. That's bros before bitches, dude. I figured you'd just find someone else. It's not like she's going to marry one of us." "God, you're an asshole," Candy said, turned and walked away. Shannon said, "Call her, Dan. You still have a chance. She likes you. That's all I hear about at school." "Okay." "Dude, I need to get you out of my sight. I want to kill you right now," Dan said, getting up and walking away. Mike only shook his head in bewilderment. Dan called Candy but got her voicemail. He left a message. "I'm sorry I was so rude to you the last time we talked. Why didn't you tell me he lied to me? I guess you thought I would believe my best friend over you. Anyway, call me. She didn't call, but Shannon texted him a week after they went back to school. Don't give up on her. She still talks about you a lot. Dan texted back. Is she dating at school? No. Okay, thanks. Over the next few weeks, Dan called her several more times, but she never returned his calls. One Saturday morning, he decided to drive down to DeKalb and see her. What's your address? Wrote Dan Shannon. I want to send her some flowers. Oh, I hope that works. And she sent the address. He found the apartment easily and saw her car parked on the street. He bought flowers and a soft toy for her and hoped she would talk to him. Shannon was studying and Candy was making lunch when the doorbell rang. Who could it be? Asked Candy. Shannon, assuming it was flowers, replied, It's probably for you. Candy opened the door and saw Dan with the flowers. Dan, what are you doing here? Shannon looked up and smiled. I'll leave you two alone. Dan said, May I come in? She took the flowers and the bear and said, Okay, over there. She pointed to the kitchen. He sat down while she made a salad. He had hoped for a warmer welcome, but at least she let him in. Candy, he began, why won't you return my calls? Even if you just want to tell me to back off and leave you alone. I don't know. I'm really mad at you for calling me a slut, especially when I had nothing going on with him. I was harsh, but I didn't call you a slut. I just meant that I'm not looking for anything casual. If we're dating, I want it to be a long-term proposition, not a short fling for a breakup. That sucks, Dan, because I really thought we were right for each other. I did too. That's why I'm trying now. Yeah, why? I haven't shown any interest. Well, your sister is working on me behind your back. She told me to keep trying. She laughed and said, I can't even seem to trust my own sister. How about we go to a movie on Friday? I'd really like to take you out. Okay, you win. But are you sure you want a long-distance relationship? She said, smiling. It's only an hour away. I think you're worth it. Before she could answer, Shannon walked in. So you two are finally dating? Yeah. Thanks for telling him not to give up. Hey, I'm just tired of you crying on my shoulder for him. Bitch, said Candy. And they started dating and things went well for a few months. During summer vacation, they spent most days together when they weren't working. One Friday, they were supposed to go to a movie, but Candy insisted on driving. Hey, no. He saw her driving in the opposite direction from the movie theater and asked, Where are we going? To see a movie. Where to? To my apartment. Why? Because my sister is at my parents' right now, and I want to escalate our relationship. He smiled and said, I like the way you think. When they entered her apartment, she didn't pretend there was a movie going on. She immediately pulled him into her bedroom. Next chapter. Life continued for the next few years. They dated and eventually got engaged, planning to get married. Shannon married her boyfriend the summer before Dan and Candy's senior year. They settled in the same town where they grew up. Dan and Mike remained best friends. After their rift, they were a little tense, but they got through it. Candy even warmed up to him after a while, which surprised Dan, but Mike would be the best man at Dan's wedding. A week after graduation, Dan and Candy moved in together. They both got jobs in their hometown and moved into an apartment a mile away from Shannon and her husband Aaron. On a dreary Tuesday evening, the door buzzer went off in their apartment. Dan pushed the intercom button. Who is it? He said. It's Shannon. Help me, please. Without answering, he ran out of the apartment and down the stairs. Shannon, oh my God, he said, as he opened the downstairs door and saw her bleeding lip and swollen cheek as she held onto his left arm. She collapsed into his arms and sobbed uncontrollably. Candy walked over and took her in her arms. What the hell happened, sis? I caught him cheating and tried to kick him out. He just laughed at me and I started punching him in the chest. He tried to stop me from hitting him and pushed me away, but I lost my balance and fell down the stairs. Candy held her for a few minutes and then said, "We need to get you to the emergency room. Your arm looks like it's broken." "It wasn't his fault. I hit him." "Okay, we'll take care of that later. Dan, please take the car. Dan, where is he?" "He was here a minute ago," Shannon said through tears. "Shit. I wish he hadn't gone to your house." "Lancelot, no," Shannon whispered to herself when Candy said, "Wait here, I'll get the keys." "I'm going to destroy that bastard," Dan said to himself as he drove the short distance to Shannon's house. He stopped and ran to the door. He didn't bother knocking or ringing. The door was unlocked, so he opened it and entered the house. "Good to have you back, bitch," shouted a voice from upstairs. Dan silently walked up the stairs, hoping for the unexpected. But he was out of luck. "Oh, it's you. What the hell do you want? A little princess showing up on your doorstep ranting lies? She fell down. I didn't hit her." Dan didn't say a word. He walked into the bedroom and punched Aaron as hard as he could. If this had been a movie, Aaron would have been knocked out. Unfortunately for Dan, it wasn't like that in real life. Dan stood up and kicked him in the back, remembering how it had incapacitated him in his fight with Steve. Ironic, he thought, realizing that the only fights he'd been in had been over Shannon. Candy ran into the room and yelled at Dan to stop. Dan, shocked by his wife's appearance, turned and saw that she was crying. "He's not worth it. Don't get yourself in trouble for him," she said. "Screw you, bitch. You didn't tell me I wasn't worth it when we were having fun last night," said Aaron. "No," she screamed. "He's lying, baby. Don't listen to him." "Oh yeah, slut. Here, man. See for yourself," Aaron said, holding out the phone to Dan. Candy tried to grab the phone, but Dan managed to keep her from doing so in stunned silence. She fell to the floor in tears, saying, "No, don't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Shannon walked in and asked, "What's going on?" Still holding her hand. "Let's get you to the ambulance. We'll figure it out on the way," Dan said. "No, baby, don't go. Wait," Candy cried. Dan ignored her and helped Shannon out of the house. Next chapter. "Dan, tell me what was going on in there," Shannon said. "Your husband told me he entertained Candy last night. I was working late and went out for a drink, so I don't know if she was home or not. Tonight, I found someone else's underwear under the bed. That's how I caught it. I don't know if it was her or not. I was at my mom and dad's. He gave me his phone and said there was proof. I haven't looked at it yet. I'm scared. What if it's true?" he said, and started crying. "I love her so much. Let's just wait until we get you fixed up. Then we'll go through the phone together." "Okay." Next chapter. Dan held the phone in his hand, waiting for news about Shannon. He tried to open the phone, but it was password protected. A nurse came out and called his name. "You can come back," she said. When he stood up, he saw Candy running toward the exit. He shook his head and followed the nurse. "Looks like you lost the fight," Dan Shannon said as he walked over to her bed. "How many stairs did you hit your face on?" He smiled, making her chuckle slightly. Her arm was in a sling, and there were several bruises on her face. "They said it's broken. I'm getting x-rays tonight, and they'll probably put a cast on it tomorrow. Have you looked at the phone? I just can't believe she could have done that. He must have been lying. It's protected by a code. I couldn't get in. Try 117711. He typed, "I'm in." He went to the Messages app and looked through the messages first. He saw a recent chain with the initial CD. He decided it was Candy and opened the conversation. There were only 4 messages. Dan assumed he deleted them regularly. CD, he won't be home after work. Aaron, she's gone to your parents' house. CD, I'm leaving. Be ready. Aaron, I'm always ready. Tears began to fall as he read the line. To your parents. It could only be her. He clicked on the CD icon to see the contact information. It was Candy's number. He handed the phone to Shannon and sat down, deep in thought. Shannon started flipping through his pictures and found several videos of Erin doing it. It looked like they were two different women, but one of them was definitely Candy. "Damn, there's this video," she said, texting herself and Dan. "There are 4 of them, but only one with Candy. I don't know this other woman." She cried, "How could she do this to us? To my sister? To my husband? I don't know. I'm sorry, Shannon. I never suspected anything. This is so sudden. I'm shocked. She never gave me any reason to think she was cheating on me. If it was just one time, would you have been able to stay with her? Honestly, if it was someone other than your husband, maybe. Betrayal toward you is unforgivable." She hung up the phone and reached for his hand. "I love you, Lancelot." "I love you too. But why did you call me Lancelot?" "That time you chased me when Steve was chasing me, remember?" He nodded. "In the tent, the policeman called you Lancelot when you said you were trying to become a white knight. You always turn up when I need you. You are my knight in shining armor, my Lancelot." Laughing, Dan said, "I forgot about that. Lady Guinevere, would you like me to call your family?" "Yes. I'll have to stay with them when they let me out of here." "Good. I'll call them." While he was on the phone, the police showed up to talk to Shannon. It's the hospital's custom to call them if spouse or child abuse is suspected. It's up to the patient to decide if they want to talk to them. Dan went out into the lobby to make the call. He managed to get into an area where Candy couldn't see him, but he could see her if he peeked around the corner. She was crying, sitting alone in the corner watching the main door to the emergency room. He still couldn't believe she'd done this to him. To his own sister. His shock passed and was replaced by anger. He called her parents and said, "Hi, it's Dan." "Hi, Dan. What's up?" "Shannon got into a fight with Erin and is in the emergency room right now." "What?" her father yelled. "Is she okay?" "She fell down the stairs when he pushed her. She has severe bruises and a broken arm. She's in emergency room 112A. "I'm going to kill that bastard." "I took a few hits when I saw him. Look, it's much worse than that." "How the hell could it be worse?" "Was he having an affair with Candy?" "What, with my Candy?" "Yeah, the bastard took a video and gave it to me." "Jesus, where is she?" "In the emergency room. They were told not to let her in." "Okay, we're on our way." "Okay, I'll stay with Shannon until you get here. She's talking to the cops right now. I don't know if she'll press charges or not, but before she knew it was Candy, she said it wasn't his fault. Now that she knows exactly who it is, she might take offense at him and press charges. Frankly, I'd send his ass to jail." "I agree, Dan. I'll see you soon." Dan walked past the police officers on his way back to the room. They stopped him and asked if he knew or had seen anything. He told them no, and they moved on. He didn't want them to know about his fight with Erin. "Hey, your parents are on their way. Are you okay?" "Yeah. They'll be here soon to take me to X-rays." "How did the meeting with the police go?" "I told them everything. That he pushed me away so I wouldn't hit him and I fell. They're going to arrest him." "Good. He was too smug about the whole thing." "How could I have been so wrong about him, Dan?" "Don't worry about it. I'm going to divorce him." "Good. You deserve better." She answered nothing and smiled falsely. As the orderly led her out, Dan returned to the waiting area. Peeking around the corner, he saw Candy and her parents discussing something animatedly. Dan pulled his cell phone out of his pocket and sent Candy the video Erin had taken. He watched as a text notification came to her phone. She opened it and saw her screaming. She sat down on the nearest chair and dropped her phone. Her mom picked it up and looked to see what was written on it. She dropped the phone in Candy's lap and stepped away from her, shaking her head. She saw Dan peeking out from around the corner and grabbed her husband. They walked toward Dan's house and turned the corner, making sure Candy couldn't see. "What a mess, Dan. We're so sorry," her father said. "I'm canceling the wedding. I can't marry a woman who first of all cheated on me and secondly betrayed her family. That's just crazy." "Has she told you why?" "Not yet. I haven't returned any of her calls. She said it was all lies until you sent her the video. Right. Lying until your last breath. How's Candy? She's in the X-ray right now. I'm going to get out of here while Candy's still sitting there. I'm going to grab a few things I need and head over to my parents' house. That's a good idea. Best to avoid her until you calm down and come to your senses. Dan entered the apartment and felt a wave of sadness wash over him. He packed his bag, ignoring the phone ringing again and again. He saw a stack of wedding invitations and tore one of them to pieces. Those pieces were left on her pillow. Candy sat in the reception area and pondered how things had gotten so messed up. Why had Aaron written them down? Why hadn't he told her? Why had he given the tape to Dan? Why had she been so stupid in the first place? Just then she saw a policewoman appear from around the corner. She walked up to her and asked, "Officer, is it a crime to record a video without telling me about it?" Well, I guess it depends on what they do with the video. Revenge laws make it illegal to put the video online or share it on social media. There are also laws against blackmail and things like that. What happened? The man I was having fun with recorded it on his phone without my knowledge. He gave the phone to my fiancé to watch it. Illinois has not yet passed a law that applies in this case. You should contact an attorney to see if you can file a civil suit against him. I'm really sorry about that. I hope it all gets resolved. Sincerely, said the officer as she walked away. Next chapter. Candy saw the doors open and her parents walk out with Shannon. She stood up and walked over to them, but her father said, "Haven't you done enough? Just leave her alone." "But Dad, please." "Don't make a scene, Candy. Just go home." "Where's Dan?" "He left an hour ago." "What? Damn it, he should be home," she said, and ran to her car to go home. As her parents turned onto Shannon Street, they saw a police car drive past them with Aaron in it. Shannon shook her head sadly, thinking about how her life had turned out. They gathered a bag of her clothes, and Shannon picked up the red underwear that had been the cause of the breakup of her marriage, and then her relationship with her sister. "Mom, these are Candy's underwear. Could you make sure she gets them? I want them out of my house." "Don't be rude. Just throw them away." Next chapter. Candy ran into her apartment and yelled for Dan. She ran from room to room, finding them all empty, and finally ended up in her bedroom. She sat down on her bed and cried. After a few minutes, she put her head down on her pillow and found the tattered invitation there. She sobbed even harder and called out to Dan again, but he didn't answer. The next day, Dan realized that he hadn't finished watching the video. Shannon confirmed that it was Candy, but Dan had to see for himself. At first, he decided to look for pictures to see if there were any signs that it was more than one time. There were pictures of women, but it wasn't Candy. He found pictures of Shannon, but walked out, not wanting to invade her privacy. He went back to the video and pressed play. He saw Aaron say he got a text from Shannon and put the phone down on the nightstand. Dan realized that Candy probably didn't know she was being recorded, and that was Aaron's excuse for handling the phone when they connected. They barely spoke at all. It was over in 10 minutes. When it was over, Candy asked, "So, are you satisfied now?" "Yes." "If Dan or Shannon finds out, I don't know what I'll do to you." "Easy, honey. There's no need for that. I'm not going to ruin my marriage by giving you away. It's our secret." "He better not find out about Mike either." "I told you I won't tell him. You kept your end of the bargain. I'll keep mine. You just have to be careful if you're going to mess with him. Walking into a motel in broad daylight is a bad idea." "I'm done either way. I'm not cheating when I get married." "You got a shitty idea of right and wrong, honey." "No. Once I take wedding vows, I'm committed. I didn't make any vows when we started dating or when we got engaged." "Wow, girl. If you don't think what you're doing is wrong, why do you have to do it with me for me to hide it?" "He doesn't need to know. That's all that matters. For now." Then the video stopped and Aaron smiled into the camera. Dan threw the phone at the wall and screamed, "Damn it!" His mom ran in and asked, What, honey? Is everything okay? No. Just found out she cheated on me with Mike, too. Oh, Dan, I'm so sorry. Yeah, me too, Mom. Me too. Next chapter. Dan continued to ignore Candy's calls. He needed to deal with Mike, and he didn't want him to blab. He could only hope Candy hadn't watched all the videos and found out he was in on it. Dan texted Mike. Meet me for a drink tonight, bro? I want to talk about the bachelor party. Yeah. Bill at 7 o'clock? Great. Bill's Pub is a bar in a shopping center with a parking lot on the side of the building. It was the perfect place for a robbery. Dan called his high school friend Javi and told him about the favor debt. One day during sophomore year, Javi and Dan were together and saw Javi's girlfriend making out with another guy. Javi beat the crap out of him, and his girlfriend ran away and called the police. Dan told the cops that the first punch was thrown by the other guy, who bullied Javi by throwing other insults about him stealing his girlfriend. In the end, Javi only got off with a fine and a few hours of community service. This was less than the other guy who was considered the instigator. Javi always thought Dan had kept him out of juvie and promised to pay him back someday. That day had come. Dan was sitting in the parking lot and saw Mike pull up. As soon as Mike got out of the car, he was grabbed by one of the two masked men waiting for him. The second guy grabbed Mike's wallet and punched him several times in the stomach. The attackers ran away and Dan got busy with Mike. Are you okay? What the hell was that? They took my wallet. Shit. Do you need an ambulance? No, just call the police. Dan called the police and they filed the necessary robbery report. Next chapter. Dan finally got tired of Candy's calls and answered the phone late at night. Hello? Dan, baby, it's not what you think. He interrupted her and said, How long have you been having fun with Mike? Dan, no, that's crazy. Look at the video. We're done. I'll take my shit and you can keep your apartment. No. Dan, wait, she said as the connection broke. Candy grimaced as she watched the video when she saw that their post-coital conversation was there as well. She burst into tears again. And then she realized that she had proof that he had blackmailed her with his words. Let's see what the cops think of this, she said to the empty room. Next chapter. Dan went to the Delaney house to check on Shannon. Her mom let him in and gave him a hug. She apologized for Candy's actions and thanked him for helping Shannon again. He made his way to Shannon's old bedroom, where she was lying on the bed looking up at the ceiling. He noticed the fresh cast on her arm and said, Can I be the first one to sign it? She jumped up and hugged him, sobbing against his chest. Why, Dan? How could she do this to us? I watched all the videos today. They talk about it. He blackmailed her. He caught her at the motel with Mike. Mike? Oh my God. Yeah. I just can't understand it. They've been having fun with each other since the beginning? That show at the mall where she gave him a stupid slap in the face was an act? I just don't know what to think. Did you talk to her? Not for long. Long enough for her to lie to me and for me to tell her it was over between us. What are you going to do, Shannon? Now that I'm done with the doctors for a while, I'm going to see a divorce lawyer. The cheating was enough on its own, but hearing that he was blackmailing her was too much. This despite the fact that he pushed me down the stairs. I can't believe I blamed myself for it at first. That's okay. He'll get what he deserves now. Did you hear Mike got mugged outside Bill's tonight? No, well, screw him for messing with Candy. Karma can be a bitch. He smiled and agreed. What's next for you, Dan? Obviously, we're done. I'm sorry about your parents because they put up part of the wedding deposit. We're not getting them back. I think I'll move back home and hit the reset button on my life. Stay in touch, Dan. We can be a support for each other. I know I'll definitely need it. Sure. I'm sure I'll need a shoulder to cry on, too. God, so much wasted time and wasted love. Thank God we're not married yet. I'm sorry I ever told you to keep trying with her. That's okay. I always stopped short anyway. My first choice was made. Her eyes lit up and she smiled at the remark. He gave her another hug and went downstairs. Her parents were talking in the kitchen when he walked in. Mr. and Mrs. Delaney? I'm so sorry about the wedding. I'll pay you back for the deposits you made. That's it then? The final decision? Yes. Turns out she had an affair with my best friend as well. Her mom started crying and her dad said, Don't worry about the money. She'll pay us back. She was a whore. Gary! Snapped the mom. I'm just calling a spade a spade. If she'd kept her legs closed, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Take care. You are wonderful people. I've been very blessed to be a part of your family these past few years. A tear rolled down his cheek as he hugged them goodbye. You never know what the future holds, Dan. We'll see, Mrs. Delaney. Take care. A week later, Dan went to his old apartment to pick up his things. After waiting for Candy to leave for work, he packed and loaded everything into the borrowed van. He closed the door and got up to look around. It made him sad to think of what had been lost. The love, the lust, the children they wouldn't have, all of it hurt him deeply. He left the key on the kitchen table and closed the door for good. As he was driving back to his parents' house, he got a call from Mike. They hadn't spoken since that night at Bill's. What? He shouted into the speakerphone. Dan, listen, it was all a lie. I never had anything with Candy. Are you a goddamn idiot or just plain stupid? She was being blackmailed because you got caught. She freaking admitted it on video. I'm sorry, man. I don't know what to say other than I'm sorry. For how long? What? How long have you been entertaining her? A little over 2 months. The first time was at Camden's party. You passed out and we played Truth or Dare. Truth or Dare? We were all drunk. Bastard, why did you keep going? It wasn't a regular thing and she always called me when she wanted to. You were my best friend, asshole. How could you do that to me? I've always wanted her, and you know it. I finally got my chance, and she was great. How could I say no? Listen to me carefully. The next time I see you, you're going to wish those guys who robbed you hadn't killed you. You're a dead man walking, and when I see you, know when I do, they won't recognize your corpse. He didn't give him a chance to answer and ended the conversation. He chided himself for dramatizing the situation so dramatically. He knew he wasn't a fighter, and he hadn't won the last couple he'd been in, so it was an empty threat. He hoped it would be enough to keep him at a distance. Next chapter. Candy was devastated that her family cut off all contact with her. She eventually transferred to an office in Milwaukee and hoped that someday they would forgive her. She knew Dan never would. The betrayal had hit him too deeply. Aaron bailed out but left Shannon alone, partly because of the restraining order and partly because he wanted to get rid of the compulsive bitch, as he called her. He ended up pleading guilty to both the battery charge for pushing Shannon and the blackmail charge. His lawyer tried to get him off the blackmail charge, but since it was recorded on his phone and he voluntarily gave it to Dan, the judge allowed the recording to be used. He got 6 months for battery and 1 year for blackmail. His attorney negotiated the battery as best as he could. Shannon's written statement implied that her fall was completely accidental. However, the push that caused it was not accidental. So he didn't completely get off. And then he moved back to his hometown when he was released after 12 months for good behavior. Shannon never saw or heard from him again. Dan met with Shannon every Saturday over coffee and tea. It was a strictly platonic relationship, just two broken hearts hiding together in plain sight. 6 weeks later, she canceled one Saturday morning. She called, but left a voicemail. In the message, she cried and said she wasn't feeling well. Dan didn't return the call. He drove to her house where she was living again after Aaron moved in. A knock on the door brought her out of her resting state on the couch. There were used tissues on it, and she was wearing an old, tattered robe. She looked out the window, saw it was Dan, and gasped. There was no way she would let him see her in this state. She screamed, "Please go away, I'm fine." He shook his head and muttered, "No." She burst into tears and asked, "Please?" He shook his head again. She gave up and opened the door. He walked in and seeing the state the house was in, he hugged her. "What happened? I was supposed to be your shoulder, remember?" "I'm pregnant." "Oh, shit." "Yeah, damn shit. Come on in, let's bring you back down to earth. I'll make you some tea." He went to the kitchen and brought her a capsule of green tea. She had a Keurig coffee maker that she used to make tea. It was easier than heating a teapot. He set the tea down for her and began gathering up the napkins and throwing them in the trash can. Once settled, he sat down next to her and put his arms around her and pulled her close to him. She cried and sobbed in his arms for 10 minutes in silence. Finally, she spoke. "I'm almost 3 months along. Because of the stress, I didn't realize I missed my period." "Who's the father?" joked Dan, for which he received a slap on the arm. "An asshole, of course. I'm not a cheater." "Of course you're not." "What am I supposed to do, Dan? I'm totally screwed. I'll be divorced in a few months and my baby will be born nameless. I've already decided I'm never going to let Aaron know about the baby after what he did, and I'm scared to death. I don't want him in my life at all." "The first thing you're going to do is take a shower. Once you've refreshed your body, I'll take you to the cafe we've been going to every week for the last month or so. This isn't the end of the world for you. It's the beginning. You're going to have a baby. A beautiful little piece of you to be molded and shaped into a future president or doctor. I envy you so much. I won't be able to raise a child on my own. Shannon, you are a beautiful woman. There's someone out there waiting for you, I'm sure of it." "Ha! Easy for you to say," she said, getting up to go to the shower. She heard him quietly say to himself, "Wrong, sister," as she went upstairs. While she showered, he cleaned up her house a bit. He cleaned up the mess in the living room and loaded the dishwasher from the sink full of dishes. When she came downstairs, she saw him wiping down the counters. "Why are you cleaning my house?" "Huh? I'm not cleaning. I'm putting things in order." "Never mind, let's go." Sitting in the cafe, he ordered black coffee for himself and tea with non-fat milk for her. She smiled, for he always remembered her order. "What?" he asked, looking at her smiling face. "How nice of you to remember my order. We've been doing this for a while now." "I know, but if you didn't care, you wouldn't pay attention to little things like that." "Of course I care. How many punches in the face do I have to get before you realize that?" She turned away and wiped away a tear. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm just hormonal." "You're pregnant. I guess I should get used to this being the new normal. Let's change the subject from hormones. Have you told your parents yet?" "No, it scares me too." "You know you have to do this before you show your face, right?" "I know, I don't think they'll be mad. They want to be grandparents very badly. They've just been under a lot of stress lately. Both of their daughters' marriages broke up. Well, at least it hasn't happened to yours yet." "Do you want me to come with you? Maybe I can take my mind off my emotions?" "I can't ask you to do that. It's not your problem." "You didn't ask for it. I suggested it, and it's not a problem. You're my best friend right now. I'm not going to let you go through this alone." "Best friend?" she said, raising an eyebrow. He nodded and said, "Yes, don't forget that." Next chapter. Shannon knocked nervously on her parents' door, hoping no one would answer. She frowned when her father opened the door. He said, "Hey guys, come on in." "Hi, Daddy." "Oh shit, I'm only Daddy when things are bad." "Meg, Shannon and Dan are here. She called me Daddy." "What's wrong?" asked Mrs. Delaney lightly, half jokingly. "Let's sit down, okay?" "Okay, Pumpkin, what's wrong?" her father asked. "I'm pregnant." "What, Dan? For crying out loud? Couldn't you have gotten married first?" said her father. Dan was shocked, and Shannon replied, "Dad, I wish I could." Dan's head spun so fast his vision blurred. "It's Aaron! I've never kissed Dan, let alone slept with him," she finished. "Oh, I'm sorry, Pumpkin. You two are so close we thought you were dating," her father said sullenly. "No, sir. We're just helping each other through our problems as friends. After all, she's still a married woman. Jesus, is that really all that's holding you back? Dan, the papers are filed. It's all over but the tears. And Lord knows she's had plenty of those. Dan sat with his mouth open. He couldn't find the words to answer, so her father continued. Dan, she's in love with you. We can all see that. Hell, we thought you two were already a couple. Dan, her mom continued, I can see the love in your eyes when you look at her. Dan took Shannon's hand and said, You didn't want me when we were younger. I didn't think you felt that way. What? Said Shannon. I've loved you from afar for years. Yeah, when we were in middle school and high school it didn't work out. But after I turned 18 and graduated, I thought I had a chance. Candy even tried to help. But when you talked me out of going to the carnival with Steve, I decided you didn't care about me that much. I was devastated. She told me later that I didn't have a chance because you were older. You got back together with your high school boyfriend. Oh, Dan. She told me Mike's friend needed a date. She didn't tell me it was you. I probably would have said yes, even though you were a couple years younger. You were cute, and I knew you were a good guy. God, after you saved me from Steve, I was so embarrassed that I just ran back to school. By the way, that guy's name was Aaron. He convinced me to give him another chance. Looks like our lives are full of wasted time, said Dan, leaning over and kissing her. Well, that's settled, her father said. Now about my future grandchild. How far along are you? Almost 3 months. We need to prepare your home. We need to set up the nursery, child protection, and shopping. Oh boy, we'll be shopping, her mom said cheerfully. Dan, if you guys are going where you appear to be headed, can you handle her having a child with another man? Her father asked. Shannon flinched and said, Dad. No, that's a valid question. I certainly haven't had time to think about it, but I don't see it being a problem, especially since you don't want Aaron involved in her life. That gave the impetus for action. Shannon cried tears of joy for the first time in months. I love you, Dan. He kissed her again and said, Sweetheart, I love you even more. Her mom clapped her hands and said, Let's start planning. A few weeks passed, and although they saw each other several times a week and talked on the phone every day, Dan realized they had never gone on a real date. He immediately sent flowers to her office and printed on a card. Would you like to see a movie on Friday? At 3 o'clock, he received a text. I was wondering if you would ever ask me out on a date. He responded as stupidly as a man had never responded to a woman before. I had to work up the courage to appear in public with a woman who is pregnant. As soon as he hit the send button, he realized he had screwed up. She couldn't see his face or realize it was a joke. He grabbed his coat and ran out of the office. She worked a few miles away, so he got there quickly. He dashed past the reception area and back to her cubicle. She had her back to him and didn't notice him coming toward her. He startled her by saying, That was a joke. She turned around and laughed. You came here to tell me it was a joke? I knew it, silly. She saw the fear in his eyes and the fact that they had turned red. Oh my God, did you really think I'd be upset? She stood up and hugged him. You're an idiot. I knew you were joking. Sandy, what did I just do? Sandy, who was sitting in the next cubicle, said, She suddenly burst into laughter and showed us the stupidest message we've ever seen. You're either the biggest idiot in the world or the luckiest idiot. Dan smiled and said, Definitely the luckiest person in the world. He kissed her and said, Well, enough drama for today. I'll let you all get back to work, and you can laugh at me in peace. Next chapter. Dan picked her up on Friday in his best suit. He had reservations at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, and the suit wasn't required, but it was their first official date. She opened the door and said, My God, you clean up so well. He didn't immediately respond because he was absorbed in how beautiful she was. Oh shit, she said. I can't figure out what part of me has rendered you speechless. Can I guess? Smiling, he replied, Your belly button. Your pregnant belly is beautiful. I love you. She smiled, held back tears, and replied, I love you even more. After dinner, he drove her home and walked her to the door. She tapped him on the shoulder and said, Dan, could you come inside and we'll have a little fun there? So they did. When the time came, Dan started going to all her doctor's appointments and LeMay's classes. Everyone thought he was the father of the baby, and he never bothered to correct them, and neither did Shannon. She was proud that people thought Dan was a father. Dan was already pulling up to his apartment when he saw Shannon sitting on the porch. What's up, honey? He said. She tossed him an envelope and said, My divorce is final. That's great, he said. What happened? I don't know. Nothing? Everything? I guess my failure as a wife is complete. How can you possibly want me? Aaron clearly wasn't enough of me. Dan realized what was happening. She'd been insecure about her small weight for a while, and she was also always afraid that he would change his mind about her and leave her for a non-pregnant girl with whom he would have a child of his own. Dan had been waiting for this day for months. He took her hand and led her to his apartment. Opening the door, he pulled her inside. Please sit down. I'll be right back. He made his way to the bedroom and rang the bell. Mr. Delaney, I'm sorry to do this over the phone, but your daughter received the final divorce papers today. She's a mess, sir. I'd like your permission to marry her. Jesus, son. You got it the first time with Candy, and no doubt you'll get it now. Go and make an honest woman of her, and then come and show the ring to her mother. I'm sure you've already bought it. Yes, sir. Thank you. I'll see you soon. Hey, babe. Could you come in for a minute? Asked Dan. You're making your pregnant girlfriend walk all the way. Dan was on one knee when she entered the room. She froze halfway through and started crying. Shannon, please make me the happiest person in the world and help me fix our mistakes. Help me stop wasting love and time, and give our child a father. Will you marry me, my love? Yes, oh God, yes. Thank God, he said. I've waited almost all my life for you to say that to me. God, so much time wasted, she said, kissing him. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.